Okay, folks, we're now live on Facebook.
Thanks so much to everyone for joining us this evening to discuss the drought conditions facing Sonoma County. Before we get going, I'd like to hand it over to Jordi, our Spanish interpreter, for a brief message for our Spanish-speaking viewers.
Muchas gracias por acompañarnos el día de hoy para tomar asuntos sobre la sequía que nos afecta en el río Ruso. Para aquellos que desean escuchar la presentación en español y nos acompañan presencialmente vía Facebook o por medio de la transmisión, pueden escoger, una vez se active la opción de el icono del mundo español, para escuchar la interpretación al simultáneo al español. Back to you, Linda Hopkins.
Thank you so much, Jordi, and thank you for being available for translation services. And thank you so much, Juan Carlos, for standing by for translation services as well. We are facing a severe drought in Sonoma County with reservoirs at record low levels and also critical fuel moisture conditions. I want to start by thanking every single resident of Sonoma County who has stepped up and done their part to conserve water. I've been hearing wonderful stories of people reusing water, in some cases multiple times, taking their gray water, using it to water their plants, using it to flush their toilets. And I really appreciate the creative approaches that our community is taking to conserve water, because that is the way that we are going to get through this drought, is by everyone doing their part and working together. I also want to thank our panelists for joining us this evening. This evening, I am joined by Grant Davis, the General Manager for Sonoma Water, Don Seymour, the Water Resources Manager for Sonoma Water, Eric Ekdahl, the Deputy Director for the Division of Water Rights at the State Water Resources Control Board, Matt St. John, the Division Chief of the North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board, as well as Christine Sosko, our Director for Sonoma County Environmental Health, and Bert Whitaker, our Director of Sonoma County Regional Parks. To make an introduction that is brief, in order to save time, I am now going to hand it over for an overview of drought conditions from Grant Davis and Don Seymour.
Thank you, Supervisor and Director Hopkins. I very much appreciate your leadership in conducting this Drought Town Hall this evening. I also want to say what a pleasure it is to be with my colleagues from the state and other colleagues at the county as we face this unprecedented drought situation. With me tonight, that's going to be going into more detail on the exact status of our two reservoirs and conditions and projections is Don Seymour, our Water Resources Manager. As General Manager, I'm responsible for oversight of an agency with about 230 employees, and we're actually a special district that was founded in 1949. What some people realize is that the Sonoma County Board of Supervisors is also the Board of Directors for the Sonoma County Water Agency. And in that capacity, they're responsible for helping to direct and oversee this and shepherding this resource, in particular, the stewardship of the Russian River. We supply as a wholesaler over 600,000 customers in Sonoma and Marin counties. We also have flood control responsibilities and work with 8 different collection systems and treatment systems for wastewater treatment. I'm pleased to say that back in 2015, we were able to achieve something called carbon-free water, which is a first, as far as I know, in California. And that's because of the leadership of our board of directors who set upon us to be working with renewable energy as our primary source for delivering water. Next slide, please. What I am wanting to make sure tonight as a brief overview, Don and I are going to tag team, is to describe it's a 110-mile long watershed. And there are 2 large reservoirs that are primary source for drinking water and water supply in Sonoma and Marin County. The smaller of the 2 is Lake Mendocino. It doesn't have any carryover storage. It was built in the 1950s, and it is currently in the most difficult straits right now. It has the lowest water levels at this time of year that we've ever seen on record. And we have a job to do to make sure that we keep water in that reservoir, in particular, enough water in case we do not get rain in the coming fall and winter months as expected. So that's Lake Mendocino up north in Mendocino County on the east fork of the Russian River. Further south, you have the larger reservoir, which is Lake Sonoma. Interestingly enough, Lake Sonoma is our primary drinking water source of supply. And it was built and constructed after the last major drought on record in the 1976-77 era. It started filling in 1983, and that is the facility that provides sort of our last opportunity to make sure that we're delivering on our responsibility for clean, reliable drinking water for the customers in Sonoma and Marin County. Next slide, please. As you'll see here, the other thing I'd like to remind folks is that we have had significant droughts, and they lead to significant responses. And so we've put this out here sort of to begin tonight, thinking about the 1976-77 drought. We actually have lower precipitation, as you'll hear later on, than that same period. And so that's the type of drought we're facing over the last 2 years is equivalent, possibly worse than the 1976-1977 drought. And as I said, one of the responses to that drought was construction of Warm Springs Dam. We had a drought, a very severe drought in 2007, 2009, and some of the things that came about as a result of that particular 3-year period was the state's 20 by 2020 water plan. They also have the CASGEM mapping that was delivered for modeling. We started the Sonoma Marin Saving Water Partnership in that particular period as a result. That's the collective water contractors committing to water conservation and water management throughout that period. And another lesser known fact is that in 2008, we actually launched the Sonoma County Energy Independence Program, largely as a result of making sure that customers would have an ability to reduce their water bills by reducing their energy and their water use. And so we during 2008, you might remember, there was no lending going on. The banks have dried up, and the economy was clearly sputtering in a recession. And by launching that program, we basically helped spur $60 million of investment in businesses and homes on water use efficiency and water energy improvements. Another drought of 2013, 2014, most of you probably remember. In that one, we passed, the state passed the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act in 2014 as a result of that drought period. We also launched and have been successfully managing the forecast-informed reservoir operations of Lake Mendocino that you'll hear more about tonight. And we also began the Upper Russian River Water Managers meetings to begin to work more closely with our colleagues and water managers up north of Healdsburg up into Mendocino County. And so that last slide on 2020, 2021 remains to be seen what type of projects will come as a result of this drought. But one thing remains a constant. We're in this together. We're looking at the entire Russian River watershed, and we're going to have to pull together, and everybody's going to have to do a collective lift to make sure we make it through this particular drought. So with that, I'm going to hand the presentation over to Don Seymour, who'll go more into detail about our current conditions in both lakes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Grant, and good evening, Director Hopkins. So, yes, my name is Don Seymour, and I oversee our Water Resources Planning section at Sonoma Water. And I just wanted to point out, I'm going to be providing a lot of information tonight, but you can go to our website, and we have updated information weekly that you can be following, what's going on with our reservoir system and flows in the Russian River if you're interested. And so I encourage you to visit our website where this information is readily available. So, because it is a serious, we're really in a serious condition. And, I really can't emphasize how distressed the Russian River watershed and both the reservoirs are. And I'm hoping, these slides that I'll be presenting kind of help get that message across. As Grant mentioned, this is rainfall. This is rainfall rated by year for a rainfall gauge near Santa Rosa. And for this gauge, 2021 and 2020 were the second and fifth lowest rainfall years. But up in throughout the region, this hasn't been equal. For a gauge, there's a similar gauge up in just outside of Ukiah, which is kind of reflective of the Lake Mendocino watershed. And for a 127-year record dating back all the way to 1887 or 1888, excuse me, or 97 is that 127-year record. The rainfall for 2021 and 2020 is actually the second and first and second lowest. So we're really on par with the 76-77 drought. And unlike the 76-77 drought, where there was relief in November of '77. There was this massive amount of precipitation that came in, and actually over a 30-day period, Lake Mendocino almost being empty at the end of November filled in about 30 days. And we're not going to be guaranteed of that kind of event occurring and potentially seeing these continued dry conditions extend into 2022. And this figure, I know there's a lot going on, but and I'm going to take a moment to describe what each of the lines are and what you see here. But you see this dashed blue line that separates the white upper area from the lower blue area, and this is referred to as the rule curve for Lake Mendocino. This is and as you can see, during the winter it's lower. It's at about 68,400 acre feet. And then starting March 1, it increases by about 600 acre feet a day and goes up all the way up to about 111,000 acre feet in the early part of May. And these other lines, these colored lines, are storage levels in Lake Mendocino for different years. And as you can see, some of these wetter years where we have higher storage, you see the storage level in the reservoir extend up into the flood control pool, which the Army Corps of Engineers controls. And you can see it rapidly released to bring it back down into the water supply pool, which is under Sonoma Water's, which Sonoma Water manages for water supply. And unfortunately, we're not in that storage level. We're actually on this dark black line at the very lower part of the figure. And this is actually, as Grant mentioned, the lowest Lake Mendocino's ever been since it filled for this time of year. And the second lowest was actually this purple line above it, which was 2014. As you can see, for this time of year, we're almost 15,000 acre feet below where we were in 2014, which we all know and considered a very serious drought. And one other line I would like to point out is the dark brown line, 2020. If you go up in the key, you can see. But there's this 1 year, 2020, where the storage level got up into this flood control pool. Excuse me, let me go back. Where the storage level for 2020 got up into the flood control pool, but wasn't rapidly released and was actually retained. And this was, as Grant mentioned, was based on forecast-informed reservoir operations that was being applied at Lake Mendocino in 2020 under a major deviation to the flood control manual. And as a result of that major deviation and being able to retain this water and not evacuate it for flood control purposes, it actually resulted in 2020 Lake Mendocino having an extra 11,000 acre feet of water. And this was huge because 2020 was actually a very dry year. And as it turned out, many of you may know, Sonoma Water did file a temporary change petition in June of 2020. And it wasn't actually in response to the drought and storage levels at Lake Mendocino, but it was in response to PG&E reducing diversions of Eel River water through the Potter Valley project. And that was the response, and our response was to make up for that. We did projection based on those reductions of transfer, and that was why we actually filed that temporary change petition in June. However, I'd like to point out the minimum in-stream flows that the order approving that temporary change petition allowed us to go to, we actually never really approached those levels. And during the entire year, or the period of that temporary change petition, we actually managed flows more like a dry water supply condition, which the Russian River was in at that time. And so we were, the flows down at Hacienda Bridge were actually closer to 85 CFS during the entire summer rather than what we could have gone down to 60. And the upper Russian River was managed closer to 75 CFS. And it was really successful. We actually, not only being able to have those higher minimum stream flows, but we actually had storage at about 40,000 acre feet starting October 1, which is a huge issue because that is about the time we start seeing incoming salmon that are coming in to spawn in the system. So steelhead, Chinook, and coho. And so we were able to retain storage and make releases for the benefit of those incoming fish. Unfortunately, if you keep on, if you look at the black, if you look at that black line, you can see that starting October 1, it continued to decline as we had little or no rain. And by December, Sonoma Water was getting really concerned that we were seeing forecasts of extended dry period, extending well out into 2021. We had very low storage levels. So in response, in early January, Sonoma Water filed another temporary change petition that applied solely to the upper Russian River. And it resulted in being able to reduce the minimum stream flow requirements from 75 CFS starting in early February down to 25 CFS. And that resulted in Sonoma in a savings of about 5,000 acre feet to date in Lake Mendocino. And so right now we're at about we're just under 35, we're about 35,800 acre feet. Without that temporary change petition, we'd be well below 30,000 acre feet right now going into the summer. I would like to point out the order that approves that temporary change petition expires in early January. And one of the reasons, and I'll discuss later too, that we're filing another temporary change, we filed another temporary change petition in May, was to extend this petition so we could continue to be in a critical water supply condition and still manage the upper Russian River to these to a minimum stream flow of 25 CFS rather than 75 CFS. And the reason that this is really important is this figure is a storage projection for Lake Mendocino. The black line is actually observed storage. It's where we are as of late May or late April, and the blue line and the gold line are projections. The gold line is a projection if we do not receive an order approving a temporary change petition to extend the minimum stream flow requirement of 25, reducing it to 25 CFS. And as you can see, without that change, Lake Mendocino is forecasted to drain by mid to late September. The blue line is projecting storage at Lake Mendocino with that order extended all the way through December. And so, and assuming it would go into effect July 1. And so you can see we're saving quite a bit of water. Unfortunately, if you look at on October 1, storage is still projected to decline below 10,000 acre feet, decline to 9,000 acre feet. And if conditions remain dry, declining below 5,000 acre feet. So, you know, just what we're requesting in this temporary change petition is not going to, you know, there's going to be a need for additional significant actions on the upper Russian River in order to improve this storage. Because one of our goals this summer, working with the state board and the stakeholders on the upper Russian River, the diverters on the upper Russian River, is actually to bring this line up to 20,000 acre feet starting October 1. And that's to continue, is to preserve storage in Lake Mendocino so that we can continue to meet that minimum stream flow requirement and also have water available for human health and safety needs on the upper Russian River if the conditions continue to be dry out into the late winter and into 2022. And so this figure right here is a similar to the one I showed you for Lake Mendocino. However, this is storage levels at Lake Sonoma. And again, unlike Lake Mendocino, Lake Sonoma has just a flat rule curve at 245,000 acre feet. So everything below 245,000 acre feet is managed as the water supply pool by Sonoma Water, and everything above that dashed line in that lighter color is the flood control pool, and that's managed by the Army Corps of Engineers for flood control purposes. And as you can see again, when storage pops up above that flood control pool, the Army Corps pretty quickly releases that water to get it back down to evacuate it for potentially the next storm that might be coming in for flood protection. Again, just like Lake Mendocino, this black line represents current storage, observed storage at Lake Sonoma right now as of June 1. Again, this is the lowest level this time of year Lake Sonoma has been since it's filled. It completed filling in 1986. And it's actually, in the next week, it'll likely be at its lowest level ever, because before that, the lowest level was in November 2014. It got down to about 136,800 acre feet. And right now, it's the reservoir is at about 138,800 acre feet. So we're likely going to get to that lowest level by next week sometime. And another thing I'd like to point out is that, you know, regardless of the storage level, if you look at, you know, each of these hydrographs, these storage hydrographs of the reservoir, no, they all decline at about the same rate, except this year. As you can see, it's declining at a much more significant rate. And that's because right now, the upper Russian River is in a critical water supply condition with a minimum stream flow requirement of 25 CFS. And the lower Russian River is at a minimum stream flow requirement for a dry water year type, and that's 85 CFS. So that difference between the the minimum stream flow requirements is requiring very significant releases from Lake Sonoma right now to try to make that up. And so there's, as I'm going to discuss in a moment, we're going to be including reducing minimum stream flows in the lower Russian River to address this very rapid decline, both to preserve storage, but also these high releases are in violation of the Russian River biological opinion. The releases there are above what's allowed before we start that it starts to degrade habitat for juvenile salmonids that are in Dry Creek and are rearing over the summer. It creates conditions of extremely high velocities, which washes them out into where they're exposed and could be, whether they're not going to survive. So, as I'm going to discuss in a moment. So this, similarly to Lake Mendocino, these are projections we've made for Lake Sonoma. And again, the black line is observed storage as of late April, when we started some of this modeling for looking at what we were going to be facing this summer. And the blue and gold line orange line are projections. The orange line is the projection if we do nothing and continue to try to meet a minimum stream flow requirement of 85 CFS on the lower Russian River. And sorry about that, let me back up. And it's projecting Lake Sonoma getting to quite low levels by November, well below 100,000 acre feet. And the blue line is a projection of what we believe the storage will be if minimum stream flow requirement is reduced to what we're requesting in our temporary emergency change petition of 35 CFS in the lower river. And it's preserved as of November 1, it's preserving about close to 14,000 acre feet of water, which is quite significant. And then as part of that request to reduce our minimum stream flows, Sonoma Water is also making the voluntary commitment of reducing our diversions from the Russian River between July 1 and October 31st by 20% compared to last year. And so again, this is the blue line that I showed you in the previous slide, and the green line is the additional savings of storage by reducing those diversions. And by November 1, that's about another 4,000 acre feet. So between reducing the minimum stream flow requirements and Sonoma Water's commitment to diversion reductions, it's saving a total of about 19,000 acre feet. And this is to really make sure we can extend storage out to when we start seeing precipitation again, so that we have adequate storage to meet our minimum stream flow requirements, but also meet the water supply needs of over 600,000 people and health and safety needs of folks and communities on the lower Russian River. And just to summarize what we're requesting, again, we're requesting, we filed our temporary change petition because the current order for the upper Russian River expires on July 26th. The water year, we're requesting the water year classification for the lower Russian River be changed from dry to critical, which will reduce the minimum stream flow requirement on the lower Russian River from 85 CFS to 35 CFS. And as part of that, Sonoma Water is making a commitment to reduce our diversions from the Russian River from July 1 to October 31st by 20% compared to last year. And we really see these as essential activities and initiatives to preserve that storage. And in my opinion, it would be reckless, and it would be reckless to not be pursuing these activities to preserve this resource Sonoma Water is in charge of caring for. And with that, I'll pass it back to Grant.
Well, thank you, Don. That was a pretty in-depth analysis of where we are at the two reservoirs. Just to wrap up and get this on to the next panelist, I Want to emphasize that, in fact, we are committing, the Board of Directors and the Sonoma County Board of Supervisors has stated a commitment to reduce 20% of our diversions out of the Russian River in this particular year. When you look at that facility there, that's one of our collector wells out around Forestville. And what I want to point out is how Sonoma Water takes very seriously our stewardship responsibility for the Russian River. Our two reservoirs that provide water supply for our community are on the Russian River or off Dry Creek, a tributary of the Russian River. And it's critical that we take care of that system. That's our natural pipeline for water delivery. It's one of the most unique systems in the United States. What we have beyond the Russian River then at Forestville, you'll see there are the municipal areas, our water contractors that we wholesale water to, our retailers. The communities of Windsor, Santa Rosa, Rohnert Park, Cotati, Valley Moon, the city of Sonoma, and down into Petaluma and Novato, and points about 25% of that into Marin municipal water. So next slide, please. What we're doing. If you look at this, we definitely have the official dishwasher of the 2021 drought. And we are making sure that that's your first line of defense, that when you're stacking, make sure your dishwasher is full and that your dog has cleaned the dishes instead of pre-rinsing with extra water. And we also know that brown actually is the new green. And that is definitely going to be one of the slogans. I subscribe that, and I've talked to others, that we need a new slogan. We need another campaign. We're definitely launching those. Next slide, please. We are in the process of making sure on June 12th, Saturday, June 12th from 9 a.m. to 12, in 3 different counties, we're going to be doing drought drop-bys or drought drive-ups, depending on what county you're in. And in each of those locations, you're going to be able to go get free samples and aerators and buckets and a whole bunch of information on how you can actually participate in helping us get through this particular dry summer. So I'm encouraging you to find a location there. You can find that also on the savingwaterpartnership.org website, each of these locations. And it's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to get probably plan on about 10,000 different customers coming in to get free water use efficiency in that process. So with that, if you could put up the last slide, I would appreciate it, Dawn, and we'll just do that for purposes of where to get more information if you haven't had enough tonight. And I want to thank you for this. And without any further ado, I'd like to pass it over to my colleague, Eric Ekdahl, who is the Deputy Director for the Division of Water Rights for the State Water Resources Control Board. Eric?
And I actually apologize. I'm going to jump in really briefly just to remind members of the public that you can put questions in the Zoom chat or in Facebook comments. We also do have the Q&A feature active on the Zoom meeting. And I would also encourage any panelists, especially if you're not speaking, it's a little challenging to do while you're presenting, to go ahead and look through that Q&A and see if there's anything that you can answer in real time, because I'm already guessing that we're going to have more questions than we have time to answer. Also wanted to mention, again, that this is being live streamed via Facebook, and it's also been shared on the Sonoma Water and County Facebook page, and a recording of the town hall will be made available on the Sonoma Water website next week. Also, a slight correction, I think I used Matt St. John's old title. His new title is Executive Officer, which is not even that new, but I apologize for that error and just wanted to make that correction for the record. So now I'll hand it over to Eric, and sorry for the brief interruption.
No problem at all. Thanks everybody, and thanks for having me today. My name, as mentioned earlier, is Eric Ekdahl. I'm the Deputy Director for the Division of Water Rights. I am hopefully sharing my screen. Hopefully you're seeing the presentation view. Are you seeing the note view or the presentation view?
We're seeing the view.
Okay, perfect.
Without your notes.
That's all I can hope for. I'm going to give a brief overview of some activities that the Division of Water Rights has been taking in the Russian River watershed over the last really year or so, and some of the collaborative efforts we've been working with Sonoma County Water Agency and a number of other entities, kind of in both Sonoma and Mendocino counties, on addressing the dry year conditions. At a high level, I'll go through all this in greater detail. I want to talk about the weekly stakeholder groups that we've had, some of the outreach we've been doing, the notices of water unavailability that went out last week, a letter to riparian and pre-1914 right holders describing dry conditions, and that the division is developing emergency regulations for potential board consideration. The Division of Drinking Water recently issued essentially a report request to 25 drinking water systems in the Upper Russian River watershed, requesting information on wells, well depth, intakes, and whether or not there could be potential supply considerations or issues should the river run dry or reach critically low levels. And then I'll talk a little bit about some emergency regulations that division staff are developing and when those could come before the State Water Board for their potential adoption and what that process might look like. And I'll try and do this all in 10 minutes. It's going to be really fast and rushed. Please put questions in the Q&A and I'll try and answer what I can. At a high level, stakeholder outreach really began last year when the development of the TUCP that Don mentioned kind of brought together a number of groups. We began working with the Upper Russian River Managers Group in July of 2020, met kind of monthly, bi-monthly throughout the fall and early part of 2021 to discuss how we could approach what we would do if 2021 turned out to be dry. There was a lot of discussion initially about potential voluntary drought agreements, something like a collective approach to group conservation levels of a certain amount that would back water up into a reservoir and then result in some savings so that the board wouldn't need to take action. But when we began to realize that this year was going to be so critically dry and that the precipitation levels are on par or as low as 76, 77 and what supply conditions in the reservoir looked like, it rapidly became apparent that there wasn't any water to volunteer, unfortunately, this year. So I think that this is a great step and a great process that we can pick up when the immediate emergency is over, but it's unlikely to result in voluntary approaches this year. In April of 2021, we began a new weekly coordinating meeting. There's over 70 stakeholders. It includes some county supervisors, Farm Bureau, flood control districts, Sonoma County Water Agency, drinking water suppliers, and tribal representatives. And that also includes the formation of a technical steering committee that helped define the agenda and kind of the key issues that were going to be brought up for discussion by this larger group. And the whole goal of this larger 70 plus stakeholder entity group is to really be upfront and forward about potential steps and actions that the board might need to take. That includes potential curtailments and potential emergency regulations. And we've tried to be as direct and upfront, like this is where we're going and this is what supply conditions are indicating. So what does that timeline mean and how can we best message this to your stakeholders, to water right holders and others involved in the Russian River watershed? The actions that we've taken to date, we did send out a notice of water unavailability on May 27th. That was issued to 930 post-1914 diversions or water right holders. A note that we use this phrase notice of water unavailability, and there's a bunch of legal nuances that go around why we use that term instead of a curtailment. And technically it is not a direct order. It's not the board ordering people to cease diversions. That could come later with emergency regulations, but a notice is essentially the division saying we've done a technical analysis and based on our technical analysis of supply and demand, it looks like there is insufficient supply for your priority of right. And this notice basically said that we don't believe there's sufficient supply for all post-1914 priority right holders, which is essentially a huge number of diverters, and it accounts for a fairly significant volume within the watershed. At the same time, pre-14 and riparian diversions, these are other types of water rights for those that aren't quite as immersed in the whole water right terminology and legal lexicons. They got a warning letter that said there could be additional actions later on that could affect your ability to divert water later in the summer. To do that, though, we would need emergency regulations, and those emergency regulations would need to specifically be addressed to pre-1914 and riparian diversions, as well as post-1914 diversions as well. All told, the notices went to 930 water right holders. The pre-14 and riparian diversions would be an additional 700 claimants of right. Just addressing the pre-1914 and riparian diversions alone could save anywhere from 1,500 to about 3,000 acre feet per month, depending on when they're implemented and who's using that water. But again, we need kind of another technical legal set of authorities in place to do that. And we call those emergency regulations. Emergency regulations are those that are put in place very quickly. They go through a much more expedited process than kind of a normal state rulemaking process. So there's a number of things that we're considering. We are looking actively at emergency regulations and are preparing a package to take before the State Water Resources Control Board for their consideration and adoption on June 15th, which is very, very soon. We're still considering a number of elements, and some of these are bulleted out here. For example, should the emergency regulations only trigger if certain storage levels are reached? Should there be a carve out for health and human safety, essentially drinking water supply? And this is specific to the upper Russian River watershed in this these sets of bullets. We do also, it looks like there is some stored water in Lake Mendocino. The Russian River Flood Control District looks like there's about 4,400 acre feet of previously stored water. Sonoma County Water Agency also has rights to stored water, but their right specifically includes a line item essentially that says that part of that stored water needs to go to maintaining in-stream flows. How else do we account for all those other nuances within the watershed? Tree health. We don't want to foreclose watering to the point where all of your trees die. There's a lot of redirected kind of impacts and considerations, and we need to really step through these. At the same time, there's a very short time frame to do so. So what we're looking at is a structure that would protect stored water in Lake Mendocino, prevent the reservoir draining, essentially. If the reservoir were to drain, especially next year, we anticipate that there would be some relatively catastrophic redirected impacts, loss of drinking water supply for communities, loss of irrigation supply, environmental flows and fisheries. All of those would be tremendously affected if the reservoir does in fact go dry. Just to note that the emergency regulations that I mentioned earlier, they would need to be adopted at a public meeting, and we're looking at June 15th. We are hoping to get the draft out as part of the board agenda in the next few days. It also has to be submitted to an Office of Administrative Law, which is a state agency that reviews regulations, and they have a public process as well. I also did want to mention the temporary urgency change petition, and this was covered pretty thoroughly before, so I won't go through it in too much detail, but we did get a new package on May 13th that would cover operations from June through about October. There were some minimum flows requested in the TUCP. The lower flows are required in part by NMFS, the National Marine Fisheries Service, in addition to saving the water supply in the reservoirs for eventual or potential need during a future dry year. But also want to acknowledge that we've received comments related to water quality. Harmful algal blooms are a concern when flows get this low. It's warm, it's hot, and there have been issues in the past. And then recreation is also an issue as well. So we're looking at a package at how to incorporate these concerns and make sure that there aren't redirected impacts to the best degree that we can, while recognizing that we really are in dire circumstances. And in part, the flows are driven by this biological opinion and the need for kind of preservation of cell-mounted species. We have a couple of contact informations bullets. There's a new drought page that the board has put together. It's pretty simple in terms of the board's drought URLs, just www.waterboards.ca.gov/drought. If you do have a specific question, there's a email that we do monitor every other day or so and more frequently when needed, that you can send an email if you have a specific kind of drought or water right related question. And then we do have a Russian River specific page. This is a little bit of a longer URL, but we can make this slide or URL available as needed. And I know that's a tremendous amount of information done very quickly, but with that, I will hand it over to the next speaker, Matt St. John.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Eric. I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, are you seeing my full screen?
Yes.
Great. Well, thank you, Supervisor Hopkins, for the invitation. And it's good to be on this panel with my state board and county partners. So I'm Matt St. John. I'm the executive officer at the North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board. So very briefly, for those of you that may not be aware, There are 9 regional water quality control boards in the state of California, and the Russian River watershed is in the North Coast region. We're essentially a sub-agency to the State Water Resources Control Board that Eric works for. The Regional Water Quality Control Board doesn't have any direct authority with regard to water rights and flow. That's the purview of Eric's division. The Regional Water Quality Control Board's jurisdiction is around what we call the discharge of waste and keeping pollutants out of waterways. So I want to cover some of the water quality related concerns that that my agency has associated with the drought. And the previous speakers have already given a nod to some of these. I've broken it up here into essentially 2 categories. Those on the left are ecological or kind of aquatic life related concerns. Those are associated with increased water temperatures, decreased dissolved oxygen levels, altered pH levels, loss of habitat, and then also increased turbidity or suspended sediment concentrations that can particularly be a concern when reservoir levels get very low. And then on the right is human health or public health related concerns, including pathogens or bacteriological conditions, and then harmful algal blooms. And I'll speak to all of these in a bit more detail. So getting to that detail with regard to the ecological concerns, one obvious impact of low flows on river water quality is elevated water temperature. So slower water velocities and reduced volumes of water leads to more rapid heating of that water, which causes higher temperatures. And then kind of somewhat similarly with regard to dissolved oxygen, under lower river flow conditions, when that's coupled with aquatic plant life growth like algae, you can have increased fluctuations of dissolved oxygen. So during the daytime, you can get higher levels of dissolved oxygen due to photosynthesis. But then at night, when those aquatic plants are respiring, dissolved oxygen levels can dip down to low levels, and at very low levels can be harmful to aquatic life. And then there can be comparable water chemistry patterns that affect the pH of water, which also can affect interactions with things like metals in water that can be problematic. And then with regard to loss of habitat, low flows can cause loss of habitat for aquatic life. And this can be a real concern. As stream flows decrease, the access to the tributaries to the Russian River is reduced. And pools in the river or in tributaries can become disconnected. And when those pools are disconnected, of course, those any aquatic organisms that need to move up and down a particular stretch of a stream can't do so. And also under those disconnected habitat conditions, fish can be forced to congregate in close together, and then they can pass disease from one fish to another more readily. So all of these combined lead to, can be summarized as stress to those aquatic organisms. So this is some data from the Russian River main stem at the Hacienda Bridge. This is for this calendar year. So in the bottom left is the beginning of January, to the bottom right is through the end of May. The orange line shows temperature conditions. It's not unusual for temperature to increase as you go from the winter into the spring and into the summer. But what we're seeing here is that the temperature is a pretty dramatic increase starting early in March and getting up into levels where these are temperatures that can be quite stressful to aquatic life and salmonids. And then the blue line is showing the fluctuation in dissolved oxygen concentrations. And what you can see is an increase in the amplitude, so higher highs and lower lows of dissolved oxygen as the season has progressed. And then an overall decreasing trend in dissolved oxygen concentrations, which again can just be stressful to aquatic life. So switching gears from the aquatic life and ecological concerns to human-related water quality concerns. The two primary ones are pathogen levels, also referred to as bacteriological conditions, which can be exacerbated under low flow conditions. And what we're really concerned about is illness-causing bacteria that can be present at times, and particularly during holiday weekends, when you have more folks recreating on the river, and then could be exposed to illness-causing bacteria. I'm not going to say more on this now because our next speaker is going to speak in a bit more detail about the bacteriological monitoring that the county environmental health is doing. So I'm going to switch now to what we call cyanobacteria, harmful algal blooms, HABs or HABs for short. And this is one of those concerns that Eric mentioned at the end of his presentation. So this slide shows the factors that can contribute to the increased frequency and severity of these harmful algal blooms. And so highlighted in yellow are those factors that are exacerbated under drought conditions. The first showing climate change and altered precipitation. Well, of course, drought is an altered precipitation pattern. As I've mentioned, these conditions can lead to warmer temperatures, both due to lower flow, but also just due to higher air temperatures. And when those factors highlighted in yellow overlap with the other conditions, which include nutrient enrichment and reduced riparian canopy, which leads to increased solar radiation, direct light onto streams, you can have elevated levels of these harmful algal blooms. So this is not a new issue. I mean, I'll also say that the cyanobacteria are ancient organisms, and their presence alone isn't bad. They've been around for many, many years, and they will be for a long, long time. And their presence alone doesn't necessarily mean a risk. But there can be risks because some of these cyanobacteria, under certain conditions, can release toxins, which can be harmful to humans. So because of these risks, over the last number of years, my agency has partnered with Sonoma Water, grants organization, and Sonoma County Health Services, who you'll hear from next, to, in partnership, do monitoring to assess cyanobacteria conditions in the Russian River watershed. So the map on the right shows the locations that have been monitored, and the different color coding just identifies the different of our three entities that have monitored at these different locations over time. So we're monitoring at these and other locations this year. So the types of monitoring that is done, it's taking a look at the species of algae, determining whether there are these harmful cyanobacteria type of algae. And when those are detected, evaluating or measuring whether they are the toxins that they can produce, and particularly looking at those at recreational beaches. And then also doing visual inspections of these algae mats. So as I mentioned, the presence of green stuff in the river alone shouldn't be a reason for alarm. Not all algae is cyanobacteria. And so the presence of slimy conditions, green algal mats by itself shouldn't be a reason for alarm. However, because there are these there has been presence of cyanobacteria at toxic levels, it's important to take the conditions seriously. And so what this slide is just depicting is that it shows photos of algae conditions, cyanobacteria conditions at different locations throughout the watershed. These were photos taken in 2016 or 2017. And in the photo on the top right, you can see that in a given photo frame, you can have both harmless green algae as well as potentially toxic cyanobacteria. And so, to the untrained eye, you really can't make a determination, but there are, really kind of common sense, basic practices that people can do to keep themselves and their family and their pets safe. And Christine Sasko, our next presenter, is going to speak more to that in her presentation. So in summary, or just to conclude, here's my contact information, as well as contact information for Mike Thomas, who's our freshwater harmful algal bloom monitoring and response program coordinator, and Brian McFadden, who's our flow and riparian specialist. He's our liaison with the Division of Water Rights at the State Water Board, and doing a lot of the coordination with the division and with the county during these drought conditions. Shown here are the URLs both to the State Board's drought page. This is the North Coast specific portion of that drought page that Eric showed. And then the bottom one is to the link to the California's harmful algal bloom portal. So I think all of these presentations will be made available soon and posted on the county's website. And with that, I will turn it over to Christine. First, I need to stop sharing.
Thank you, Matt. Let me go ahead and share here, get my screen up. Whoops. Thank you, Matt. You did a wonderful job setting up everything and explaining really how our water quality program comes about. And thank you to Supervisor Hopkins and everybody here for the wonderful presentations. With environmental health, our role really comes in, from what Matt talked about with the conditions on the river, with the temperatures rising, the dissolved oxygen levels, the pH, the habitat. That brings up those public health concerns, which are the greater pathogen concentrations and then the harmful algal blooms. And so for Sonoma County, we're looking at those recreational waters and looking at how to really provide the best environment for our community and how to give you the best information and tools to stay safe this year. So our water quality testing program, we have both a freshwater and an ocean water program. We do weekly monitoring for bacteria, and that happens in our freshwater program on the Russian River and also at the Spring Lake Swimming Lagoon. And then also we do the ocean water testing program out at the ocean beaches. You can see there's a sign over here, which, sorry, it's not a great picture, but These signs are posted at all the beaches, and they're really talking about the state guidelines and that the water in that area is meeting those guidelines based on our recent sampling. And this particular sign, like right now, is showing okay, and it gives healthy bathing habits and information. And then if there is a concern with bacteriological sample, then these are changed to either the yellow caution or the red warning sign. So when we talk about the pathogen concentrations, we look at both total coliform, E. coli, and Enterococcus. We do test for all three of those out at the ocean water beaches. In the Russian River, we only test for total coliform and E. coli now, due to the fact that the Enterococcus test has a high false positive rate. So we're not doing that test on the freshwater bathing areas. So on the Russian River, we have our monitoring program. It generally starts the week of Memorial Day and ends the week of Labor Day. This year, we went ahead and started 2 weeks early due to the lower flows, the high amount of traffic that was on the river, and just the overall weather conditions and that. So there's 10 sampling locations that are along the Russian River, and those 10 sampling locations were picked based on those being the most populated beaches and having the highest use. So those are listed here. And then going on to Spring Lake, which is the other freshwater bathing area, there are 7 sites within Spring Lake that are tested. And then Spring Lake in itself is a little bit out of the ordinary. It's not like the river, where Spring Lake does not allow swimming in the lake area. In the lagoon area, it brings in water, but it's also chlorinated. So we're testing it for pathogens and the bacteriological, but it also has a chlorination system. So that really helps keep that recreational water health in that area. Then out on the ocean, we have many miles of ocean here. And so along our coastline, we have 7 more sites that we test regularly. These are tested once a week from April 1st through October 31st. And they're tested for the pathogens or bacteriological sampling. So then, as Matt said, you know, we start looking at, with these conditions on the river being right for having the possibility of harmful algal blooms and also higher pathogens, we are looking at the state guidance for cyanobacteria. And if you recall, many years ago, we actually had a dog death that happened out on the river. And at that time, we started our program. Our program was a pilot program that we had been running annually. And in this last year, the state has come out with a full guidance. So we're going to be following the state guidance this year, and also looking at following the state signs and such that have been put together. And so for the harmful algae blooms, that is something that we're working collectively, as Matt said, with our regional water quality control boards, the water agency, and parks. So really working as a collective group to make sure that we're bringing the best information out and keeping everybody in the community safe. So on the left here, there's a sign. This is basically an informational sign. which would be posted early, just letting people know that you might see algal mats and some examples of what they might look like. And then also providing that warning of not having children, small children and dogs eating and drinking and playing in those mat areas. And then on the right here would be the alert. And this would be after a mat has been identified. So if there's a suspicious algal mat, then the alert would be posted at that time, and then further sampling and testing would be done. So then the second type of, or the second area where we're looking at algal blooms is we're also looking in the water column. So you could have the mats which are like on the beach and kind of in the ground on the ground in the water, and then also floating on the surface. But also within the water column itself, there can be algal blooms. So the information provided from the state has an outreach flyer, which is here over on the left. We're looking at sharing flyers like this at the parks and getting that information out. And then if an algal bloom is noticed in the water, then the relative sign would be posted at the site. That would be either a caution, warning, or danger, depending upon the level that's found there. So I think if there's one thing to just kind of leave, as far as all the recreational health and going out and playing on the river this year, I think it's really important that we still go out and we play and we have fun, but let's do it safely. And so this is just a list of some healthy habits to protect both you, your family, your pets. And I think the really important ones here are, if you are swimming, don't drink the water while you're swimming. Make sure you wash yourself off after you have swam. Make sure you're towel drying yourself. Beware that if there's currents in that water, you don't want to be swept downstream. And then also, if there are any signs or advisories posted, make sure you read those advisories and follow those advisories. And then if you think you notice a harmful algae bloom, make sure you don't let your pets, other animals go drink from that water or eat the scum that might be on the shore. And then also report it, let us know about it, so that we can further investigate and follow up from there. So I'm just going to leave with some of the resources. Sonoma County Environmental Health has a water quality site. We have what we call our beach hotline, and that is at 707-565-6552. You can call that hotline and it'll give you a rundown of all the freshwater beaches and the ocean beaches and tell you what their current status is. There's also a web link, it's a little long there, but if you just Google Sonoma County Environmental Health Water Quality, it'll take you up to the site. And then, as Matt put up earlier, to report a harmful algal bloom, you can report that at 849-729-6466 or at mywaterquality.california.gov.has. So that's the information.
Thank you so much, Christine. And I believe that we're handing it over to Bert Whitaker, Director of Regional Parks, next.
Yes, yes, thank you.
Hey, good evening, Bert Whitaker here. you know, it goes without saying that the water resources are just so important for so many of our summer recreation activities. So as we head into this summer, you know, is a significant recreation provider, we don't know what's going to happen with these historic flows. So far, so good with overall water quality, and what we saw this past Memorial Day weekend looked much like what we saw last summer, with very, very busy facilities as we were experiencing much of the lockdowns and very few things for the public to do. But as we're going into 2021, I would say expect crowds. Our beach parking lots on the coast of the river, what we've seen is they tend to fill up by about 10 a.m. on weekends. And it's a good idea to have an alternate destination in mind if you head out and you're not early, or just plan on going later in the day. We do see by 3 or 4 in the afternoon, usually parking spots are opening up, and it's a wonderful time to enjoy some recreation outdoors. We have implemented now year 2 of basically, if you follow us on Twitter, our handle is at Sonoma Parks. We've been putting out updates for parking capacity when parking lots are filled and when space is available. And we're pretty aggressively increasing the number of restrooms at our Russian River parks, trying to improve sanitation. Of course, this time of year, hiring seasonal staff left and right. And they're launching, when you go to the regional parks this summer, you'll see a new public information campaign really focused on 2 key messages this summer, which is trash your trash and take your float. Trying to help with the stewardship that we've seen along the river with lots and lots of trash. Our water safety patrol with roving lifeguards and rangers is back on visiting Russian River beaches. The life jacket loaner stations are back in place at the facility, so please feel free to grab one for you or a family member and return it when you leave. And certainly we always recommend be careful when swimming in the Russian River. There are so many unseen hazards in the river, and especially with flows below normal, it can be deceiving, but there's still deep water and deep pools in areas, which has been a common cause of fatalities over the years of individuals unable to swim ending up in those pools. Our summer dam and swimming area at Healdsburg Veterans Memorial Beach is not possible this year. The beach will be open for wading, but there is not a water impoundment. And as mentioned earlier, we're preparing to open the chlorinated swimming lagoon at Spring Lake Park by July 1 to really help families cool off the summer and provide a safe place for outdoor swimming. And the 2 other lower river summer dams located at Johnson's and Vacation Beaches, those are operated by the Russian River Park and Recreation District. Those are scheduled for installation here in mid-June, a couple weeks ahead. So in the essence of time, I will turn this back over to Supervisor Hopkins for Q&A, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Bert. There are a lot of questions in the Q&A, so a reminder to our panelists to keep typing away if possible to answer some of those questions in writing. I can also promise that we will take all of those questions with us, and we can post an FAQ for anything that we don't get an opportunity to answer this evening. You know, I'm seeing a number of questions along similar lines, which is asking about, and I think this is the conversation we always have in a drought, agriculture versus urban water use. What is the breakdown? And also, you know, quite frankly, why can't we distinguish between more essential and less essential uses? And I know that Eric has responded, thankfully, to a number of those questions in the Q&A. But I'm wondering if there's any comments on just generally how water use looks in Sonoma County in terms of percentage breakdowns, and then talking a little bit and addressing that tension and sort of how it works from a water rights perspective.
Maybe I can take a brief stab at that and others can chime in. I would say you focus on the unincorporated areas, and more often than not, you're looking at wells and other sources. If it's the urban municipalities, it's more likely going to be delivered and getting Sonoma water from the Russian River. Although our water contractors, invariably, all of them have other supplies as well, other local supplies that they rely on in addition to what Sonoma Water can provide. So the lion's share of our water is going into consumption and urban public health and safety and drinking water.
Thank you, Grant. And maybe Eric, you could just touch on sort of water rights 101. You know, I remember reading Cadillac Desert right back in college and just talking a little bit about kind of what does and perhaps what doesn't make sense about how we handle water rights in California.
Yeah, it's an immensely complicated topic. And, you know, very roughly from a breakdown, about 80% of the state's water use does go to agriculture, but it's tremendously variable. You know, and that's why that average, I think, is so difficult to apply in any one setting. It depends on what watershed you're in and what basin you're in, where that number can be completely flipped around and reversed in terms of agricultural and urban settings. There are now needs for in-stream flows and kind of other beneficial uses they're referred to. So it's really difficult to say. One thing that we have noted is that, the system is archaic. It's outdated in a lot of respects. And it's difficult to find some of the data that we need on a short turnaround time. It's difficult sometimes to track who has a water right and how much water they're using. And that adds to the general difficulties in kind of doing a fast response to drought conditions when they emerge. But that being said, the board is responsible for balancing those beneficial uses and those competing claims. And what we saw during the 2014 and 2015 drought is that the urban water conservation does actually have a significant and profound effect on water savings and what can be available for other types of beneficial uses. Over the 2.5-year time period, the state saved a collective 2.5 million acre feet of water. This is in kind of the 14 through 16 time period. That's about 3 full Lake Folsoms, roughly, maybe a little less than that. It's a tremendous amount of water that, in other times can be shared or distributed, or imagine if you're taking that from the system during the peak of the drought. So, urban water savings is really important. And at the same time, agricultural entities are doing a lot of work to make sure that they're not pulling from water during the peak kind of dry season. And I think you all get to meet my cat shortly. The off-stream storage and collection during winter. A lot of vineyards in the North Coast region have off-stream ponds that they capture water during flood conditions and put it aside and use that during the summer. Low flow drip irrigation and a lot of kind of innovative efficiency technologies are applied throughout the state. So, and then those agricultural entities also experience fallowing. In the last drought, about 700,000 acres were fallowed during the peak of the drought. That's a tremendous amount of land and water savings that go along with it. So during droughts, everyone is affected. And I think Grant said it earlier that it's really going to require a kind of coordinated and focused effort to work together to get through. These are really historic conditions, unprecedented, and when we kind of do some of the math, maybe as dry as any time since the Dust Bowl of the 1920s. That's how significant of a drought this is.
Thank you very much for that information, Eric. Matt, I saw that you just answered this in the Q&A, but I do think it might bear repeating publicly, which is there were some questions surrounding harmful algal blooms. How does one identify that? How does one keep oneself safe? And I think it's an important answer that maybe you could share verbally as well.
Well, as far as how to keep yourself safe, I mean, Christine covered that, I think, pretty well. Largely it's common sense. I mean, with the toxins, the pathway for getting the toxins is primarily ingestion. And so, it's the obvious thing. Don't let your kids play in an algae match, whether it's the cyanobacteria type or a green algae. Keep your pets out of that area, and if they do go into get covered with algae, try to wash them off as quickly as you can, because the licking of their fur can then ingest that toxin. As far as identification, I mean, it truly, I appreciate the interest, and I applaud the interest in learning how to identify. The truth of the matter is it's highly technical. Sometimes you need microscopes to really determine one species from another. The untrained eye and even the trained eye, you don't necessarily know just by looking at it. So, I mean, what I put in the chat is, I'm willing to talk with Christine in her shop about, could we put on some basic kind of layman level training? We can talk about that and potentially host something. There are informational brochures about basic identification that we have, and we can make that available. But I guess what I would encourage is, rather than thinking that you need to be able to identify it, treat it with caution, but then also don't be hysterical. as I said in my presentation, any green stuff in the river doesn't mean it's bad stuff. And if it is the toxin forming type, which it can be, you know, common sense of not drinking the water, not letting your pets drink the water, bathing with fresh water afterwards are gonna keep you safe.
Thank you so much, Matt. This question I think would probably be for Eric, and the question is, how will wells be monitored? And then there was sort of a different question that was, you know, basically, should I be monitoring my own well for, you know, the depth of groundwater, and, you know, and then what does one do if suddenly one's well runs dry?
Yeah, I'll jump in here and then maybe turn it over to one of the other speakers if they want to jump in. So wells are actually outside of the regulatory purview of the Division of Water Rights. There's a certain kind of subset of wells that are right next to a river that capture something called underflow or subterranean stream. And apologies for my dog barking right outside the door. Lots of pets right now. So in general, you absolutely should be monitoring the depth of your well. It's kind of part of due diligence of well ownership. And for some people, you know, maybe you have a really robust supply and it's not an issue, but during droughts, you know, those supplies tend to become less robust than maybe anticipated, particularly when it's a drought of this magnitude. So understanding kind of what your depth to your pump is, what your depth to groundwater is, whether that's changing over time. It's, you know, one thing if it's only 3 feet above your pump, but it never changes, you're probably not in quite as much of a risk as something that's rapidly declining over a few short days or weeks. Work with your local county. They may have options, they may have resources. The Department of Water Resources maintains a website for people where their well has gone dry. And sometimes there are resources available. And with that, I'll maybe see if someone else wants to jump in.
Grant, I'm wondering if you want to share anything about, you know, from the water agency perspective. And I also do want to add that really the first stab at regulating groundwater in the state of California came about from the GSAs that we have formed, the groundwater sustainability agencies in critically identified basins, of which we have 3 in Sonoma County: Petaluma, Santa Rosa, on whose board I serve, and then East County. But that is not really sort of geared towards a drought response, right? That's looking at long-term sustainability. So, you know, it is very interesting where that has for the longest time, until the passage of the regulation that put SGMA into effect, really been the Wild West of water use in California. But Grant, do you have any thoughts on sort of that immediate response and groundwater and well monitoring?
You know, Eric gave you the best resources, but Director Hopkins, I would say you've been an active participant in the groundwater management and the sustainability. That's our future. It took that last drought in 2014 to pass that regulation. California was the last state to come online to begin to regulate and manage their groundwater. But surface water and groundwater are connected, and that's the lesson. We are better prepared than they were, but we've got to get those groundwater basin plans completed by the end of the year, and ultimately up and running, which you and your colleagues are going to be part of. We do a lot of technical work on that. And I just say that we can no longer afford to wait to see when your neighbors put in a straw deeper than yours and your well goes dry. We just don't have the infrastructure to properly manage that, but we will. And it was state leadership, quite frankly, during the last drought that got us there. And I want to put a plug in for the need to better manage our groundwater basins. There's 3 of them, as you mentioned. There's another one up in Alexander Valley, potentially. That's not quite the same level of urgency, but it could be. So we're hard at work. There's a huge opportunity, and people have to realize that, you know, if that's your source of water, it's in your interest to make sure you know the level and whether it's being sustainably managed.
I appreciate that. And I do want to echo what Eric said, which is that you should be monitoring your well if you are reliant on well water, not only for sort of quantity, but also for quality, because sometimes quality can also be impacted during a drought in terms of, you know, different types of things that pop up in the water. Another question that I'm hearing quite a bit of is really, you know, on one side, what's taking us so long, right? How come we're not doing more? This seems like an urgent situation. The word unprecedented has been used. We are looking at potentially the drought of record for this area. Things are looking pretty dire. And so, you know, why aren't we moving faster? Why aren't we looking at mandatory sorts of cutbacks? And then on the other hand, what are some other things that go beyond those sort of general basic ideas about water saving that locals can implement to try to ensure that we're doing everything we can to conserve. Don't know who wants to take a stab at that. Eric, I know that you explained that there's some process with respect to state processes. Maybe you could share a little bit about that, and then maybe Grant could talk a little bit about our work with the water contractors in the cities.
Yeah, I'll offer some verbal text. And if you give me a moment, I'll try and find a slide that illustrates how quickly things changed in the month of April that I think helps set some context, because a lot of the plans that people were making through at least February and March were based off traditional hydrologic patterns. We have wet seasons in December, January, February, March, and kind of make assumptions based on that. And you're always ending up in this kind of waiting game. Is it going to rain? Is it going to rain? And some of the storms that we did see, you kind of do this forecast and they didn't produce the amount of precipitation that we thought. And so those models all kind of went a different direction than what actually we saw on the ground. And so that's part of it. And again, I'll see if I can find it if someone else wants to jump in a moment. The other thing is that, like, for the temporary urgency change petition and other permits, there are oftentimes statutorily mandated timelines in some respects. You have to offer it for public participation, public review, public comment, and then it just takes staff some time to review and compile what's a fairly technical and rigorous legal document. So all that goes into producing some of the outcomes that we have to see. And if someone else again wants to jump in, I'll see if I can find my slide.
Perfect. I'll hand it over to Grant. And Grant, I'm wondering if, to make it even more of an interesting conversation, if you also want to mention Potter Valley, because I've been hearing a lot of questions surrounding, diversions from Potter Valley, that impacting our water supply. So in 2 minutes or less, Potter Valley, plus what can you do, and why are we not taking more aggressive measures? No problem, right?
No problem. I would say, yeah. Why are we not? Potter Valley, it's the third reservoir. It's up in Lake County. It drives our water year, which is often wrong. It was built over 100 years ago, and as Don Seymour, who was giving us all that modeling this work, can tell you, PG&E just received their variance from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which means they're basically getting no more water coming off of, to speak of, from Potter Valley into Lake Mendocino. So what you're seeing right now, if we don't take further corrective action, it's going to be a more typical response, say 2 out of 10 years. Fortunately, like I mentioned before, there was corrective action in the last drought. For the last 6 years, we were working on forecast-informed reservoir operations, and we saved about 11,000 acre feet of water last year. Can you imagine what Lake Mendocino would look like right now if we had not done that at this time of year? So FERO is something we'd like to employ. Hopefully there'll be a result of this drought. We'll be putting that in place in Lake Sonoma, which is the primary source, and we could have huge benefits, probably have more water for lower river purposes if we can get that going soon. So my short answer is I'm hoping we can expedite that process, not do 6 years, because we were learning in the way we were doing it. Let's cut it in half, maybe 3 years. We'll have a FERO project up on Lake Sonoma with a little bit more supply and make it more resilient. So I wish I could say we operated faster, but we are doing everything humanly possible. Potter Valley is going to be a long-term process, however, as you know, Supervisor, and we're hoping we're going to get the type of funding we need from the state to do the studies that are required to see if we can get a two-basin solution that continues the diversion, but also protects both the Eel River and the Russian River watersheds.
Thank you very much, and we'll hand it back to Eric. You're on mute, Eric.
There you go. Hopefully you can hear me now. Granted, this is a different watershed, but this is a picture of Yosemite, and it was taken the last week in March for 5 years in a row. And it shows the progression of the previous drought, right? You have a wet year in 2011 going to this record low snowpack in 2015, where our snowpack was about 5% of average in March. And this year in Bay Delta, although this is indicative of conditions kind of statewide, Russian River is not snowmelt supplied, but other parts of nearby are. The Eel is to a degree. We actually had a fairly robust snowpack in April. About April 1st, we were about 65% of average. And over the course of a month, it all disappeared and none of it showed up in the reservoirs. So where did it go? Did it go kind of seeping into dry soils that just kind of absorbed it? Did it sublimate directly into the atmosphere? That's going to be a question that I think researchers and hydrologists are going to have to spend a lot of time trying to answer. But it kind of shows how quickly things changed at a statewide level over a relatively short amount of time period. And so that kind of triggered the need to take all these actions that we're just now kind of catching up with. And it really kind of set an unprecedented pace for how quickly conditions can change for the worse.
Thank you very much for that. And I know that we are running out of time. So very last question is just, let's talk a little bit and dive into more of those individual conservation strategies that we really think will be effective. You know, a number of people are asking, what can I do? I recognize the severity of the situation and what resources are available. I do know that we have resources available at Sonoma Water. So Don or Grant, if you wanted to kick that off.
I mentioned earlier, we're going to have a drought drive up or drop by on June 12th. Please go on the Sonoma Marin Saving Water Partnership website, because there you'll find the locations where you can get all of those water efficiency devices that go into your home. But I think we have to look at outdoor irrigation. That's going to be for this year, our biggest savings. And we're going to need to probably move from a voluntary level into something that's probably more mandatory. I hate to say it, but Eric is sitting on our TUCP right now. They've worked diligently, and Don Seymour, they've been working around the clock to get to this point. And we need to have that issued. Once that's issued, we will be in that mandatory 20% diversion reduction. That will translate into a host of water conservation initiatives throughout our water contractor community. Everyone, though, regardless of your source of water, whether it's groundwater or upper Russian River water or the lower Russian River, needs to be a part of this conservation ethic. Everybody's going to be taking part Russian River wide. That's why that drought drive up is 3 counties, Marin, Sonoma, and Mendocino. And then you can find all kinds of facts about what you can do actually personally to reduce your water usage. And that's something that everyone needs to continue practicing, that culture of conservation.
Thank you so much, Grant. Well, with that, we will be concluding. And again, if there are any outstanding questions, we will work to get those answers and posted on the website. Thank you so much to all of our wonderful panelists for joining us this evening. Thank you to Jordy, our interpreter. And just thank you so much, Bert, Matt, Eric, Grant, Don, Christine, for joining us this evening. It was very informative, and I look forward to continuing this kind of engagement and continuing to provide this information to the community on an ongoing basis. Take care, everyone. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.